Welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield on the Rural Radio Network. You know the old saying, what comes down must go back up once again. If we rewind to last week's program, a lot of frustration. Saw a lot of negativity within the trade. For a Wednesday, I don't think there's many complaints to the numbers that we're seeing on this cattle market. But what's going on? We know that the weight numbers are always about 2 weeks behind. So if you remember 2 weeks ago, it was extremely hot. We're going to talk about the weight differentials and also take a look at really what's happening. Are we still in a bull market? We're going to get all the details on this week's trade coming from Brad Kooima. He's with Kooima Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So got to start there. Last week was a down week. Sure made up the difference this week, Brad.
Then some today. Wow. Thanks for having me on, Susan. And, I guess, to go ahead and be perfectly candid, there's plenty of times where the futures have a big down day and people call and say, what happened? What's the deal? What's the news? And I'm often at a loss to really describe the play-by-play of why it should have been down. And frankly, I'm having a little bit of a trouble with that today, which I love because, typically the market goes up and there isn't a lot of news. That's even more of a good sign, right? The old saying, when you whip the horse, it had better run. And we didn't really have much whipping here today. I do think that, to try to let's start with the cash market, I think, because I thought that last week that's where a problem was, where some of these guys in the north became pretty easy sellers, selling cattle like at 183, which is like 3 lower than we'd gotten the week before. And a lot of us were going like, what's the hurry, but understanding, I think, a little bit of the psychic, at least of some. This weather has been horrible, Susan. I don't need to tell anybody that's lived through it. I mean, extreme heat and humidity 2 weeks ago. Death loss not aside, the weight loss and the going off of feed, and these big fat steers that they don't come back on feed either. And most of us veterans like this know this, and so I think people were easier sellers than they would have been otherwise too. So I thought that fully steady bids on a Wednesday started it. Basically, I'm bid here steady with the end of last week. And now we kind of are going like, yeah, I think a couple of dollar higher futures. Let's wait, So now we swing our leverage maybe a little bit back here to the feed yard and away from the packer.
Well, you were talking about this before we started the program, that you're looking at these numbers and there's talk of hog weights being down, and they're inside climate controlled buildings as much as they can be. So if hogs are taking a drop in weight, cattle definitely are going to take a big drop.
One would certainly think. And my partner, Joe, pointed that out earlier this morning. And because those weights come out on Thursdays, they're 13 days old when you get them. There are some little glimpses of weights, but it's not the comprehensive, including all the weights. So, I thought he made a great point. Well, you don't suppose the packer knows what those, well, of course the packer knows what the weights are, because when you sell cattle, they write the check. It's weight times price. I mean, we all know what they weigh. They know what they weigh. We don't know what they weigh. Something I've been campaigning for 5 years, that we should have next day weights. Anyway, it'll be interesting if coincidentally the weights don't drop. I don't know how. Well, personal story. Okay. So I had a set of cattle that got a big enough set of cattle that got sold, half of them in front of that big heat cycle and then the other half behind. The half gate cut 46 pounds lighter on the ones that are after the heat. So it's real. And those cattle had a Cadillac facility. Okay. So in a shed with fans and everything else. But so we'll see. Perhaps that'll tell us, or maybe 11 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be disappointed again, but certainly I'll be watching that email for sure.
Well, you were talking too about some 179 trade coming out of Kansas from one major,
which started much earlier than the week and was the dead top of what the last 2 weeks have been. And then what has happened the other 2 weeks is they trade at 78 and then they trade just a handful at 9 on Friday. And so that, I think, got everybody's attention for sure. There still seems to be some movement here, unusual movement of cattle. And what I mean by that is cattle moving from one region to another that sometimes doesn't always happen. We've picked up some instances where cattle have moved from, Iowa, South Dakota, all the way down to Texas. I was hearing some talk about some Kansas cattle moving to Nebraska. So, I don't want to get caught up too much in that, but I mean, typically those sort of things happen when you get, regional imbalances of the supply, right? I mean, tightness, and then you got cattle that really grade well up here in the north. So you might have somebody down there that doesn't have cattle that grade very well at all. Last week was the lowest grade Texas had in about a year and a half. It's up just a little bit this week. Or they're moving cattle down there because they want to improve their grade or their quality of the cattle that they're offering to their customers. So it's still it still walks like a duck, is what it feels to me like here, Susan.
So are we still in a bull market?
That's, you caught my reference. That old saying, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. I think the market still has that bull market characteristics of, you go through a period of time where they try to break the market, and does it really break? No, it actually goes mostly sideways, which is a strong sign. And then, finally the sellers say, well, I guess we can't get this thing to roll over. And then the market comes doubling back on itself. The timing particularly interesting, and the way the spreads was particularly interesting today, with October being the strongest. Everybody that's ever traded a futures contract knows that the Goldman roll starts in a couple of days, so that everybody knows that they're going to have to sell October, right? And by December, well, it doesn't look like everybody had, that class of that. They did not have a very good day. So you wonder if that wasn't part of the story too, with maybe catching up on some of these people that are trying to front run that roll a little bit. So really encouraging. 182.70. This is about the biggest premium we've had to the north or to the south here again in a little while, but market knows what the cash market is. That's for sure.
So what are you hearing about consumer demand?
Well, so far so good. This would be the time of year where they're going to, throw that out there that, we're after Labor Day. Now we got to pay for the new blue jeans for school. And, the weather maybe is shifting. Last week in the Labor Day weekend was one of the best weather weekends they'd had on the East Coast in a long, long time. And we hear that clearance was really good. I still think you have this change in the paradigm of, regular, useful domestic demand, like you and I do, where we grill it in the backyard instead of going out to eat. I think is still carrying it. The one part of the consumer demand that is exceptionally good is the grind, the hamburger deal. It's crazy. And you talk to some people that supply that market, and it's hard for them to kill enough cows to meet the demand even. So I would say by and large, at least to answer your question generally, demand remains extremely good.
I guess one final question for you. Are we going to still see some more cattle hogs spreading at this point?
It's, we were talking about that, Joe and I were a little bit ago. It seems like whenever you have a sharply something day on one of the others, the other one is the opposite direction. So I wonder if we didn't unwind some of those cattle hog spread, or hog cattle spreads rather, that went on here a few days ago, and maybe unwound them a little bit today. It isn't lost on me either, Susan, that if you I've got a chart of an S&P right over here on one of my second screens, because it's a macro, right? And we're worried about the economy and all that other stuff, and what that might do to demand. Well, the stock market was sharply lower today, or at least, is right now. We got a little ways to go. So with that action in the cattle, it's even more impressive given the fact that we were doing that with the sharply lower S&P and stock market today.
All right. Lots of great stuff. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Look us up at kkvtrading.com is probably your best place. Thanks for having me on again, Susan. We'll see you next week.
All right. As we always remind folks, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's this week's Cattle Call right here on the Rural Radio Network.